Hey folks, Nick here from Another BookTube channel. Today with my monthly wrap-up for the month of September of 2024. This was a very good reading month for me in terms of quality, because I think I read 3 books that are going to be in or near my top 10 at the end of the year. Like, I had multiple 5-star reads this month. In total, I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 novels, and I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 graphic novels. So also good month in terms of quantity. Let's jump in with one of the graphic novels. Actually, we'll start off with 2, both by the same artist and creator, Richard Sala. The first is The Chuckling Whatsit and Poison, Flowers, and Pandemonium. The Chuckling Whatsit, I think, is a bit of an alternative comics classic at this point. I've only recently discovered the work of Richard Sala through the pages of Blab magazine, a couple which were from the 80s, which I've been picking those up recently from my local comic shop. And I really like his work. It's very interesting art style. It's a little bit like Charles Addams, who created the Addams Family, mixed with the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Like that's probably the best way I could describe it. He likes to draw monsters. He likes to draw like noirish type stuff. And The Chuckling Whatsit is very much a noir story about this newspaper reporter who's like down and out, who takes over for an astrology column, and he ends up investigating the serial killings of various other astrologists nearby, and he gets pulled into this crazy mystery that involves this artist that used to create dolls from like hair called Whatsits, and there's multiple secret societies at work. It's really dense. It can be a little bit confusing for the first half of it. There's just more and more information that gets added in, but by the end, it all gets a bit more clarified. While I was reading it, I was reminded of Like a Velvet Glove Cast in Iron by Daniel Clowes. That style of like almost dreamlike storytelling where things almost don't make sense. Well, for Velvet Glove, it really doesn't make sense. This one, different in that it is an actual narrative story where it has a complete beginning, middle, end, and everything is set up and paid off. Like, things make sense. It just takes a while to get there. And if you stick with it, I really, really enjoyed it. And I really like the artwork as well. Same goes for Poison, Flowers, and Pandemonium. This one was a collection of stories. It's 4 stories in one. Some better than others. I read it in the beginning of the month, and a lot of them I have mostly forgotten the details of. There was one story that stood out to me, though, because it was basically just a great way for him to showcase and draw cool monsters from like pop culture history, where this girl goes to a bookstore and opens up a book about monsters, essentially. And so it's, we're flipping the pages and she's flipping the pages, and she's seeing all these different monsters. And they're just rendered really interestingly by Richard Sala. So I like his artwork a lot. I would say Google his name, go to images, see what his art style looks like. And if you dig it, I recommend both of these books as places to start. Chuckling Whatsit, a little bit more dense. Poison, Flowers, a lot easier to get into, but maybe not as strong as a story as Chuckling Whatsit. I'll skip over to a novel that I did not really care for, and that is Zombie by Joyce Carol Oates. This was not my cup of tea. I think for fans of extreme horror, this is probably a really good book. And I don't deny that it is very well written and well structured, but it is disturbing as hell, and it's very off-putting and unsettling. And I found myself just kind of cold reading it. Like, I didn't know what I was supposed to get out of the experience, and so I got nothing out of it. It is a first-person point of view from the perspective of a serial killer. This guy, Quentin, who becomes obsessed with creating his own zombie, basically a sex slave that he can lobotomize and who will do his every bidding. And so it's from his perspective, and his mind is very broken. So it's a lot of like repeating itself, and the sentence structures that your literature professor, your English professor would give you a red mark on it, like, no, you can't begin a sentence with an ampersand, that type of stuff. But his mind is consistently written by Joyce Carol Oates, which is good. It feels very convincing. I just felt so distanced from it because it was so unpleasant, that I would not read it again, and I can't really recommend it to anybody other than people who like transgressive or extreme horror. Just not really my thing. Let's switch back to comics. Geiger, Volume 1 by Geoff Johns and Gary Frank. This is my first dipping of the toe into Ghost Machine, which is a new comic imprint. I think it's part of Image Comics, but it's this creator-owned superhero universe that is relatively new. I think it's a couple years now. Geiger was kind of, I think, its big flagship title that launched everything. So this is the first series that came from it, and it was really good. The story is taking place after the bombs have dropped, and Geiger is a character who was a family man who his family, he got to their underground bunker right before the bombs dropped, but he was locked out, and he was undergoing chemotherapy at the time. So the superhero origin story is that the nuclear explosion mixing with his particular chemotherapy chemicals, which were like these new type, made him radioactive. So he is Geiger, and so he's this he's a completely radioactive man who he's got these two rods that he like sticks into his back, and as long as they're in there, the radioactivity is stored in those rods, and like he can live normally. But once he takes those out, he uses them as clubs, and he gets this like neon green glow to him, and he's basically indestructible. Really cool design, great looking character, and it was a really solid story. I enjoyed it a lot. Let's switch back to books, novels. Promised Land by Robert B. Parker. This was the first time I've read a Robert B. Parker mystery. The first Spencer novel I've read, although it's not the first Spencer novel. This is just the first one I happened to grab. It was good. Solid, noir, private eye type of story, where Spencer is hired first by a husband to find his wife who has run off, and then he finds the wife, and then the wife hires him to help her out of a jam, and then the two stories end up crossing over. It's good. It's solid. I found myself a little bit annoyed at how perfect Spencer was. Like, he's this incredibly muscular, in shape dude, but he's also really well read and smart and funny, and women love him. And he was just like a little bit too perfect. I would have liked to see him kind of make a mistake. Like he comes up with a plan for the end of this book, and I'm like, oh, okay. Just like every book that's ever been written, the plan is going to go awry, and like it doesn't. Like it just goes off without a hitch, for the most part. Like there's a little stinger ending, but I'm like, oh, his plan was flawless. That was great too. So like that bothered me a little bit, but it was solid read. I also think that this book holds the distinction of having the best author photo of all time. I read something very different. Let it never be said that I don't appreciate a good classic once in a while. I read The Stranger by Albert Camus. I believe that's how it's pronounced. And this is actually my second time reading this. I read it for the first time long time ago. Didn't really remember much about it. Decided to give it a shot again, and I really enjoyed it again. I thought this was a great book, but it's not one of my 5 stars. I've got more of those to tell you about, but this is still really high up on that list. It still might make it in my top 15 at the end of the year, probably will. This is a classic novel, bit philosophical. So this book is about this guy named Mersol, I think it's pronounced. I don't know. I don't know French. But he's a very disaffected kind of person. He doesn't show a lot of outward emotion. He has a bit of a rich inner life, but he doesn't emote a ton. He's just kind of going through life. The book opens with him attending his mother's funeral, and he doesn't show a lot of grief there, and other people judge him for that. And over the course of the book, he ends up killing somebody to like help his neighbor out of a jam. It's just kind of something that happens, and the rest of the whole book is basically just people judging him for not having outward emotions. And it's really good. It's really well written. The translation here is done by Matthew Ward. And I think it's a great translation because it captures the emotion of the story very well. It conveys, I think, the intention of Camus really well. I think I struggle sometimes with translations. I think a lot of times translations do lose the intent and that emotion of the writer in trying to be too literal. This, I think, came across very smooth and really got across the point. But now let's move on to one of those 5-star reads that I'm going to talk about, and that's Flicker by Theodore Roszak. This I did post a full review of this. I loved this book. This is a book that is perfect if you love film history. If you are a film history buff and the minutia of how film works and just everything about the medium, this is a neat little conspiracy for you to read. This is about a film student who becomes obsessed with the works of a cult director named Max Castle, and he discovers that there is a potential secret hiding in that director's works. And the whole book is basically like a history textbook of this fictional director, of this film student, tracking down more of his movies and trying to piece together what is going on. Like, what is that secret message? What is happening here? Why do these movies affect him so much? And I think this is brilliant. This was a hypnotic book, a great read. Check out my full review if you want to know more about it, but I'll leave it at that. I loved Flicker. Let's go back to graphic novels really quickly. This one was very different. I read this one just as I read this in like one little sitting, just as a way to like decompress after, I think, probably Flicker. The Great British Bump Off by John Allison and Max Sarin. This was a charming little comedy, a cozy murder mystery or attempted murder mystery. It parodies the baking show, the Great British Bake Off, the Great British Baking Show. I forget. And it's full of characters who are like the archetypes that you usually see on that show, where like there's like granny character, and you've got like the hosts there, like Paul Hollywood and Prue, but they're comic versions. And it was cute. There's an attempted murder in the tent on the first week of the show, and one of the contestants just takes it upon themselves to try to solve whodunit. And it's cute. It's fine. It was a good little break from more serious stuff. The artwork was nice, very aesthetically pleasing. So that was fun. If you like cozy mysteries, you might dig that. Something that I did not like at all. This was easily the valley to my month of peaks in terms of reading. Slave Ship by Frederik Pohl. This is my first Frederik Pohl that I've read, and it does not bode well for me wanting to read any more of his stuff, because this was really dull and unsatisfying. This is a science fiction story about a Marine. Is it a Marine? He's in the Navy. I'm so tired. He's stationed at this base where he finds out that what's going on there is they're learning to communicate or give instructions to animals, like communicate with them, not like a two-way talk, but be able to like give them orders and have them understand and carry out actions. I thought that that was going to be like the main thrust of the book, and like this guy is going to have to like lead animals in battle. But what it ends up actually being is just not that. I honestly don't even want to talk about what it actually is because it's so uninteresting. But I've already forgotten most of this book. It doesn't fulfill its premise much at all. This was dumb. This was dumb. I'm sorry. It was originally serialized in like a pulp magazine format. Those those 50s pulps. Maybe it worked better in a serialized format, but as is here, like this really stunk. This was not good at all. Very disappointing. Another pretty good book, but like not that good, was Unnatural Selection, a Buffy the Vampire Slayer novel by Mel Odom. This is a story. This is another. I've read a few Buffy books at this point, and I feel like they just keep going back to the fairy well. Like there's been multiple books now where the monsters are fairies. And it's weird because in this one they pretend like they've never encountered fairies before, and it's like this is the 8th book in the series and you've encountered them like 4 times already. Basically, there is a park that is being dug up and they accidentally unleash these fairies that were imprisoned there, and the fairies are kind of wreaking havoc a little bit. They're threatening Willow, they're kidnapping babies. Like it's that kind of whole mess. It's just okay. I don't think that this captures the voice of the show too well. This felt like just nothing. This didn't feel like Buffy to me. But not disappointing was Tiamat's Wrath by James S.A. Corey, the penultimate book in the Expanse. Let's see, is it book 8? Yeah, it's book 8, right? Yeah. This was phenomenal. And this is another one of those 5-star reads that's going to end up probably in my top 10 at the end of the year. I don't want to go too much into the plot because it's the 8th book in a series. You've either read the series, so you already know what happens in it, or you haven't read the series, and telling you what happens in book 8 is irrelevant and pointless. So I'll just say that this is really a special book. I just never thought that this action space opera could make me feel emotional. Like I did not realize how attached to these characters I had become. And I legitimately had to fight back tears a couple times reading this book. I love these characters. I adore them. And they go through some difficult times here, and not all of them make it to the end. And it is really rough. And it's just it's a great story overall. If you've not read The Expanse, I still haven't read the last book, but I could already recommend the entire series to you. It's so special and so good. I just love it. All right. I don't usually mention single issue comics that I read during the month because then otherwise these videos would just be hours long. But I did read one this month that I liked a lot, and I wanted to spotlight it because it's an indie comic, so it might not have the press and the attention that like a Marvel or a DC would have. It's called Sunflowers by Keezy Young. It's published by Silver Sprocket. Silver Sprocket publishes a lot of really good independent stuff. Highly recommend just browsing the website, seeing what catches your eye. But Sunflowers is a single comic. It's an autobiographical comic by Keezy Young where they talk about their experience just living with bipolar disorder. And it's a really beautiful book. The art is really lovely. It's very informative. Because it's being written by someone who lives it, who has the experience. It feels very enlightening. I feel like I have gotten a little bit of a glimpse into what it's actually like to peel away a little bit of the stigma around the curtain of like what actually is bipolar disorder. I just thought this was really nice, and kudos to Keezy Young. I wanted to spotlight this. Check it out. It's if you get it off Silver Sprocket, I think it's only like $6. Like, it's really good. So just get it. Just support an independent creator and just get it. Another comic series that I read was Barnstormers. This is by Scott Snyder and Tula Lotay. I am not usually a Scott Snyder fan, but I do like Tula Lotay's artwork. I actually own an original page from this series, which I just bought not having read the series yet because it was available. I met Tula Lotay at New York Comic Con last year. It was there. It was affordable. I love the artwork, so I got it. So I finally read Barnstormers, and I really enjoyed it. I was, again, surprised because I don't usually like Scott Snyder's writing. This guy is on the run, and he's on the run in his like prop plane that he does like shows in, like those the death-defying loops and the flying real close to the crowd and the ground and all that. And she is a runaway bride in a relationship, in a marriage that she wanted no part of. She was basically forced into it, and she forces him to kidnap her. They go on the run together. They start performing shows. They start taking money from very wealthy people. So they get like a reputation as like a little bit of like a Robin Hood. And it's a really nice love story. And the biggest draw of it for me is Tula Lotay's artwork. I think I've never seen a style quite like hers. And I think it works really well. I will say, for the romantic portions, there are times when the action, I think, doesn't quite land as well. I don't think that that's her strongest suit. I think moody atmosphere, eroticism, like that's really her forte. Some of the more action sequence, like with the planes flying and with shootouts, they don't have that kinetic energy that you see in comic books, like in action scenes. That's not really what her style is for. But all the other stuff, the romance stuff, it's really great. Next up is What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher. This is the sequel to What Moves the Dead. What Moves the Dead, that was one of like the earliest reviews I ever posted on this channel. I liked that book a lot. It was a reimagining of The Fall of the House of Usher. This book, I don't think, is a reimagining of anything. It's nothing that I'm familiar with. So I think this is like an original concept. It was okay. It was not as good as What Moves the Dead. But it's a short, basically, novella. And it does enough with the spookums and the scary stuff to hold your interest. I like the characters. I like T. Kingfisher's writing style more than anything. I think I've read a few books by her now, and she does something really well with horror, which is that she knows how to make it funny without detracting from the horror. She has a very funny voice in her narration when she speaks, when she writes, that fills the book with humor, but does not make it a joke. The last time I read one of her books, it was A House with Good Bones, and I had read it immediately after I read How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. And his stuff, he's trying to be funny, and it just doesn't land for me. It's very unfunny to me. And then I immediately followed up with T. Kingfisher, who is an expert, I think, at blending that comedic, humorous voice with scary stuff. So this was not my favorite of hers, but it definitely wasn't bad. It just, wasn't the best. And on that topic of filling, a horror story with humor, the last book that I read this month, or the last one I'm going to talk about, which is my last 5-star read, 10 out of 10, that's The Sundial by Shirley Jackson. And I did post a full video on this where I explained that Shirley Jackson is hysterical, and we have to stop pretending that she's not. She writes her books to be funny. They are purposefully humorous, and they are also scary. The Sundial, I think, is her most overtly funny book that I've personally read of hers. She's got more, but I have not read everything yet. But I absolutely loved this book, And I mention in my review that it reminds me of an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. So if that teaser whets your appetite a little bit, go watch that full video to get how I got to that conclusion. But I loved this book. This immediately came to the same level for me as Haunting of Hill House and We Have Always Lived in the Castle. This is so good, and it's a book that you never hear about. When Shirley Jackson is talked about, it's always Hill House, it's always Castle, it's always The Lottery. I've never heard of the Sundial before. I picked it up just to try it, and I loved it. I thought it was phenomenal. So I really recommend this one. Check out my full review for my complete thoughts. And finally, the last comic book that I read this month was Bone Volume 1, out from Boneville by Geoff Smith. I've been meaning to read Bone for a really long time now. I've heard it called like the best fantasy comic of all time. I don't know about that yet. I've only read the first volume. I wanted to read this to see if it was going to be maybe a good book to recommend to my nephew. And I do think that it would be. And I think pretty much anybody could enjoy this. I think even though it's published by Scholastic now, this comic was originally just published like independently, alternatively just to everybody, and adults primarily, probably. So I think that there's stuff in here to enjoy for everybody. This is definitely one of those things where, yeah, you could give it to your kids, but you're going to also really get a kick out of it if you take the time to read it yourself. Geoff Smith's cartooning is brilliant right off the bat in this first volume. I was really impressed with it. There's a lot of good humor in here. There's also some good like spooky stuff, which I really dug. I really like the character designs. There's a lot of cute characters in it. A lot of spooky characters in it. Of course, I love Thorn. I love the dragon. I love Grandma Ben. They're so much to like already in this, in just the first 6 issues of Bone. So I'm looking forward to getting the second volume, and I'm eventually looking forward to getting a copy for my nephew. I hope he likes it as well. But yeah, that does it for my month of September. My new goal for this year is to hit 100 books read. I've never done it before, and I've talked in the past about how the number of books read is arbitrary, because here, like as an example, like this is a book and this is a book, and this one takes a lot longer to read than this one, but they both just count as one in that check column. And even if you go by like word count, or maybe not word count, but page count, pages are differently formatted. There's bigger font, less font, smaller page, bigger page. So benchmarks like that for reading goals, I don't usually go for. But I did notice that I hit 76 books at the end of this month. And so it's really not out of the question for me to hit 100. And so maybe it's just like that, that part of me that remembers being a student and having to read X number of books to, win the free personal pan pizza at Pizza Hut, fill out my sheet. Maybe that's just what the part of my brain is being activated here. But hitting 100, I really want to do that. So I'm probably going to cheat and read a lot of shorter books for the remainder of the year. I don't want to cheat too much, though. I am going to try to still finish up The Expanse, which is, that's one longer book. And I also want to continue The Wheel of Time. But everything other than that, I might be trying to keep things pretty short just to hit that benchmark. Because, it'll be fun. So, yeah, let me know how your September went. Let me know if you read anything that I talked about today and your thoughts on those books. Thank you very much for spending some time with me today. But now it's time to get back to reading.